Lesson 2, Unit 5, the Logical Framework Matrix. The Logframe Matrix is part of the Logical Framework Approach, or LFA. The main output of the LFA is the Logframe Matrix. The Logframe Matrix enables decision makers to identify project purposes and goals and plan for project outputs and inputs. The technique is used for planning projects, providing an objective basis to evaluate projects and to state assumptions about causal linkages. The log frame displays the key elements of a project design and their relationships to each other in a way that facilitates project analysis and guides project implementation and monitoring and evaluation. The log frame consists of a table with 4 rows and 4 columns, and it sets out the logical sequence of cause-effect relationships based on the results change and objectives hierarchy. The first column is the project hierarchies of objectives. The level describes the overall objective of the project, the outcomes, outputs, and activities. The next column lists the verifiable indicators. The third column lists the means of verification, and the fourth column lists assumptions for each level. Note that in this model there are no assumptions for the overall objective. The information to develop the log frame comes from the objectives tree and the selected strategy of intervention. There is not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between the levels of the objective tree and the levels of the log frame matrix. Depending on the analysis of the problem, the project design team will need to make a decision and identify the overall objective, the project outcomes, and the outputs. Sometimes the desired results will be the project outcome. The end will become the overall objective, and the means will become the project outputs and activities. The result is a breakdown structure of the project objectives. Here are 4 levels of the log frame with activities, outputs, outcomes, and final goal. Each element of this structure is identified by a unique number that follows a hierarchy from outcomes to activities. This representation helps identify a key characteristic of project design. In order to deliver output 1.1, all activities under that output must be completed. And in order to achieve outcome 1, all outputs must be delivered. When all outcomes have been achieved, then they will be able to contribute to the final goal. The project needs to complete all the activities, deliver all the outputs, achieve all the outcomes in order to achieve its final goal. For example, if activity 2.2.2 is never completed, then the output 2.2 will not be delivered at 100% of what was planned, which will result in an outcome that is only 75% complete, and that might have an effect on the achievement of the final goal. The log frame asks a series of questions. What do we want to achieve? This is the ultimate goal and outcomes of the project. How are we going to do it? These are the outputs and activities. How do we know that we have done it? These are the indicators that will help measure the progress. What will tell us that we did it? The means to verify the validity of the indicators. What are the conditions? These are the assumptions or factors beyond the control of the project. Answering each question using the matrix helps organize information into a structure that facilitates the management and monitoring of the project. The first level is the goal, also called the development objective. This is the long-term result that the project seeks to achieve. The project contributes to this goal. It cannot take full attribution, since there are many other factors or interventions that are also contributing to this goal. This is important to understand. The ultimate goal will not be achieved by the project alone. The project is just one intervention that, along with other development projects or initiatives, are all contributing. The outcomes are the primary results that an intervention seeks to achieve. They are most commonly in terms of the knowledge, attitudes, or practice of the target group. These are also called changes in behavior. There can be short-term outcomes and intermediate outcomes. Outputs are the tangible products, goods, services, and other immediate results that lead into the achievement of the outcomes. They are in direct control of the project. Activities are the collection of tasks to be carried in order to achieve the outputs. This is a type of work that the project will spend most of its time planning, organizing, and expending its resources. The indicators are the quantitative or qualitative measures used to demonstrate a change. They detail the extent to which the results are being or have been achieved. The indicators can be measured at each one of the levels. The Logframe can include indicators at levels for activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. Indicators can help monitor the progress of the project and how the intervention is generating the expected positive change in the target population. Indicators also help answer these questions. How do we know that we are making progress? At each level, the project has information that it can use to monitor the progress and make the required corrections. Activity or process indicators measure the efficiency of how the project is using inputs to create the expected outputs. Indicators at this level may include the number of events, the number of trainings planned, the resources used, and the time to complete an activity. Output indicators measure the tangible deliverables of the project. They help track the efficiency in delivering goods and services. They might include the number of people trained, the number of water wells constructed. Outcome indicators measure changes in knowledge or behavior. After people complete the training, the indicators help measure if they are using their knowledge or skills as intended. The impact or the long-term outcome indicators are related to the ultimate goal of the project. They measure the changes in the conditions of the target population, such as improvements in health. Indicators can be direct or indirect and qualitative or quantitative. Direct indicators is the data that the project will collect. Indirect indicator is the data that was collected by an institution, another project, or comes from other sources of information. Quantitative indicators describe quantifiable changes such as enrollment, rate, gender disparity, number of persons benefiting from a certain activity. The indicators are observable and respond to the questions such as how many, how much, and how often. Qualitative indicators describe changes that cannot necessarily be captured in number, such as changes in behavior, changes in practices, and how people feel about the changes that they are seeing in their groups or in their communities. They respond to questions such as how, why, what, and why. A good log frame will include both qualitative and quantitative indicators. Here's a good method to ensure the indicators are of good quality. Additional considerations when selecting log frame indicators include: is the data readily available and accessible during the life of the project? How often does the project need to collect the data? How relevant is the information to the purpose of measuring changes in the project objectives? How credible is the data, especially when using secondary data? How reliable are in terms of providing with consistent data throughout the life of the project? Answering these questions can help with the selection of indicators that will be helpful in monitoring the project. The means of verification is the source of information for the measurement or verification of the indicators. They indicate where the data can be obtained to prove that the objectives defined by the indicators has been reached. They identify the sources of information. These can include surveys, interviews, progress reports, government data, and they help provide evidence of the existence of the indicator. The final column is assumptions. They are the important events, conditions, or decisions which are outside the control of the project but must remain favorable for the project objective to be attained. At the moment the project is designed, there are a lot of assumptions that are made, and these assumptions have a tendency to change. It is not uncommon that a long time has passed from the moment the project is designed to the moment it's implemented. and it's natural that some assumptions may have changed. During the implementation phase, the project team will need to review if the original assumptions are still valid or not. If an assumption has changed, they will need to review the project logic and understand the effect of the change in the objective. The team will need to make corrections or changes to the plans and implementation strategies. Assumptions at the activity level are much easier to manage than assumptions that change at the outcome level. The core of the logical framework is the temporal logic model that runs through the matrix. The temporal logic designates the causal relationship between each level of the logframe: activities, outputs, outcomes, outcome, goal, or impact, and the critical assumptions affecting these linkages. This takes the form of a series of connected propositions. The completion of the activities will result in the delivery of outputs. The delivery outputs will result in the achievement of the expected outcomes. And the achievement of the outcomes will contribute to the realization of the project goal. This is sometimes called the vertical logic. In the temporal logic model, assumptions are important in clarifying the extent to which the project objectives depend on external factors that are outside the control of the project. At each level, the connection between the components of the project logic are dependent on assumption. In the temporal logic model, it takes form of a series of connected propositions. If these activities are implemented and these assumptions hold, then these outputs will be delivered. If these outputs are delivered and these assumptions hold, then this outcome will be achieved. And if this outcome is achieved and these assumptions hold, then this goal will be achieved. Here's an example of the Logframe 4x4 matrix. The first column with a narrative summary of the goal, the outcome, the output, and the activities. The other columns include the verifiable indicators, the means of verification, and the assumptions. In this example, the project logic goes as follows. If the project completes the training on safe hygiene and sanitation practices and people have time to attend the training, then 100 households completed training on safe hygiene and sanitation practices. If 100 households are trained on safe hygiene and sanitation practices and people are able to use their new knowledge, then 90% of participants will practice safe hygiene and sanitation. If people will practice safe hygiene and sanitation and people are able to have good access to water sources, then there will be an 80% reduction of water and sanitation related diseases. Note that there is no assumption at the goal level because the project is not reaching a higher goal. The verifiable indicators describe the measures used to demonstrate changes and the means of verification, the sources of information that validate the indicators. The design of the project follows a top-down approach where the project goal is broken down into outcomes, then outcomes are broken down into outputs, and each output is broken down into activities. During implementation of the project, the process is reversed. The completion of all activities results in the delivery of all outputs. The completion of all outputs results in the achievement of the outcomes, and the achievement of the outcomes contributes to the final goal. The Logframe matrix is the basis for the development of the project plan, and that will include the schedule and budget for all activities. It is important to remember is that the Logframe is not a rigid tool, but one that should be adapted to the changes in the context. As the project makes progress, changes will happen. The monitoring data will provide information to identify the causes of the problem and develop corrective actions on time. Assumptions change, new risks occur, and the project manager should regularly review the Logframe to make the required changes, especially in the levels of activities and outputs. It is important to remember that the logical framework is not a rigid tool, but one that should be adapted to changes in the context. Another important factor to remember is that the logical framework should be developed in close dialogue with the key stakeholders. The participation process serves several purposes. It increases ownership from all the stakeholders. It increases a shared understanding of the problem. It is a shared formulation of the solutions, and which in turn create a realistic and relevant project proposal and implementation plans.